The history of a state is not always just a path to greatness, but also the art of survival. On the southwestern edge of the Caucasus, there was a land that was almost never safe. Armies passed through here, borders changed, religions and empires clashed, and power could cost you your life as soon as tomorrow. This place was constantly caught between powerful neighbors, and each of them considered it their own prize. To survive here meant not to win, but to retreat in time, negotiate, and anticipate the next blow. Local rulers rarely became heroes of the chronicles, but it was they who kept the region from total destruction. Their decisions often seemed questionable, sometimes even treacherous, but almost always were the only viable choices. The history of the Principality of Samtskhe-Satabago is precisely a story about power without illusions. And that's exactly why it explains so much in the history of the entire Caucasus. Welcome to the Amazing History channel, and today we continue our journey through the complex and underrated history of the Caucasus. Special thanks to the channel sponsors and everyone who supports the release of these videos. Thanks to you, topics like these actually reach a wide audience. Well, let's get started. The Principality of Samtskhe-Satabago emerged in a place where geography determined almost everything. This was a border area in the southwest of Georgia, at the junction of the Caucasus and Anatolia. Here, mountain passes, trade routes, and military paths converged, connecting the Black Sea coast with the interior regions of Asia Minor and the Middle East. It was easier to pass through this territory than to go around it, which meant it couldn't be ignored. Borderlands almost never belonged to just one world. Samtskhe was simultaneously influenced by Georgian tradition, Byzantine heritage, and the Islamic East. At different times, merchants, missionaries, and armies came here, and all of them left their mark. Unlike the inner regions of Georgia, here the authorities always had to take into account not only the will of their own suzerain, but also the interests of their neighbors. The history of Samtskhe is almost inseparably linked with the history of one family, the Jaqeli. Their origins trace back to the Chorchaneli house, a noble family of Armenian origin, whose name is associated with the expression Chars Vang, meaning four monasteries. This family appears in sources as early as the 9th century and gradually establishes itself in the south of Georgia, in the border area between the Christian Caucasus and Anatolia. The name Jaqeli itself appears later and has a territorial character, literally meaning from Jaqi, named after the fortress of the same name, Jaqi, on the Jaqetskali River. In the 12th and 13th centuries, the South Caucasus was already united into one of the strongest Christian states in the region, medieval Georgia. It was a centralized monarchy with strong royal authority, a developed system of titles, and a clear division of roles among the nobility. Within this system, there were so-called eristavs, regional princes responsible for specific territories, and above all, for their defense. The Jaqeli were exactly such border lords. Their early holdings were in the Samtskhe region, which guarded the southwestern approaches to Georgia. This was a zone of fortresses, garrisons, and constant military readiness. Throughout the 12th century, the Jaqeli acted much like many major feudal lords of their time. At times, they participated in conflicts with the central authority, sometimes supported separatist uprisings, and acted based on their own interests. These clashes reached their peak during the reign of Taimur the Great. The senior line of the family, led by Botsa Jaqeli, fell out of favor, losing their titles and lands, and the family name itself temporarily faded into obscurity. However, power passed to a collateral branch of the family, the house of Cekis-Jvari, which also descended from Chorchaneli. The revival of the Jaqeli family is associated with Ivan Kvakvare from Cekis-Jvari. It was he who returned control of Samtskhe to the family and established himself as the main regional ruler. No longer just as the king's governor, but as the actual master of the territory. Although formally the Jaqeli remained vassals of the Georgian kings, real interference from the central authority in their affairs became increasingly rare. When the old Georgian kingdom began to fall apart in the first half of the 13th century, the Jaqeli family found themselves at the very center of a major conflict. The Mongols came to the Caucasus as a new power that reshaped the entire region. From the south and east, the Ilkhanate was forming. In the north, the Golden Horde was active. And Georgia found itself between these worlds without any real resources to resist. Most Georgian nobles preferred either to submit immediately or to hide out in fortresses, hoping to wait out the storm. Against this backdrop, the Jaqeli family chose a different path. The key figure becomes Sargis Jaqeli, the ruler of the borderland Samtskhe, a land through which armies passed and where it was impossible to simply wait things out. The Georgian king, David VII Ulu, rises up in rebellion against Mongol rule, and he places his hopes specifically on the Jaqeli family. And this is no coincidence, because Sargis was a man who knew how to fight. In the winter of 1260, Sargis leads about 8,000 warriors into the field. Against them were nearly 20,000 Mongol horsemen under the command of Arghun Aka. The first clash looks almost like a miracle. The Georgian vanguard of 1,500 men routs 6,000 Mongols. But the illusion doesn't last long. When the main forces join the battle, the advantage becomes overwhelming. The uprising is defeated and Sargis has to retreat, first to the royal camp and then to his own fortresses. In the spring of the following year, the Mongols moved to finish off the rebels. Arghun Aka attacks Sargis's ancestral fortress, Samtskhe-Saatabago. And here, the Jaqeli family once again holds on at the edge of the abyss. The fortress withstood the attack, but it becomes clear that this is the end of open warfare. Sargis and King David give up resistance and flee to the west, to Imereti, under the protection of another Georgian king. Well, after that, a game begins that is far more dangerous than the battlefield. In 1262, Sargis accompanies David VII to the court of Ilkhan Hulagu Khan. In one version, he takes responsibility for the uprising, sparing his king from punishment. He describes the rebellion as a response to abuses, not treason. Mongol tax collectors. This step could have cost him his life, but instead, he gets a chance. Sargis takes part in the Ilkhan's war against the Golden Horde. In one of the battles, he supposedly saves Hulagu's life. This story, of course, may be embellished, but its consequences are quite real. The Khan decides to reward the Georgian prince and grants him the city of Keren. For Sargis, this is the peak of his influence, but for his enemies in Georgia, it was exactly what they needed. The perfect reason to turn King David against Sargis. He is accused of treason and upon returning to Tbilisi is arrested. But Sargis ends up behind bars only for a short time. Khan Hulagu personally intervenes and Sargis is released. This moment becomes a turning point. Sargis will remember the betrayal from his own court forever. He makes a choice. Sargis breaks with the Georgian center and remains a loyal vassal of the Ilkhans. In 1266, Hulagu grants his domain the status of Inju, crown land. This meant that Samtskhe was no longer directly subordinate to the Georgian king, but was under the personal protection of the Ilkhan. This event practically became the starting point of the independent existence of the Principality of Samtskhe. After the death of Sargis I, the model he had built was adopted by his son Beka I, who went down in history as Beka the Great. Beka expands the territory of Samtskhe to the east and relies not only on military strength, but also on prestige. He connects the Jaqeli family with the Byzantine world by marrying his daughter to members of the ruling dynasty of Trebizond. Now the Principality of Samtskhe appeared as an equal partner in the system of Christian states of the Black Sea region. At the same time, Beka I maintains working relations with the Mongol court and does not break ties with Tbilisi. For the first time, Samtskhe begins to exist as a full-fledged principality, recognized in several political worlds at once. However, this phase of complete independence turned out to be short-lived. In the first half of the 14th century, a strong figure, George V, known as the Brilliant, returns to the Georgian throne. He set out to restore the unity of Georgia. In 1334, Samtskhe once again found itself drawn into the orbit of royal power. Georgi legalized the rule of the Jaqeli family. The ruler of Samtskhe, Sargis II Jaqeli, received from him the highest court title of Atabeg. And most importantly, this title became hereditary. From this moment, Samtskhe is officially called Samtskhe-Satabago, the domain of the Atabegs. Formally, the principality returns to Georgia, but on completely different terms than before. After the death of Sargis II, power passes to Kvarkvaradö, who was confirmed by the king himself. He becomes the founder of the main ruling line of the dynasty and the first Atabeg of Samtskhe in the full sense of the word. Not just a military governor, but a hereditary prince with recognized status. Thus, the compromise between the center and the border elite is legally formalized. However, the compromise established under Georgi V lasted only as long as the strong royal authority endured. After his death, the restored unity of Georgia once again began to weaken rapidly. The center was losing control, and regional rulers, including the Atabegs of Samtskhe, once again faced the familiar choice: either wait for instructions or act independently. But for Jaqeli, this choice was already obvious. In the second half of the 14th century, the geopolitical situation also changed. The Ilkhanate, which the Jaqelis had previously relied on, collapsed, and this drastically changed the balance of power on the southern borders of Samtskhe. The unified center of power in the south, with which agreements could be made, disappeared. For a short time, this void was filled by Timur, better known as Tamerlane. His campaign swept across the Caucasus and eastern Anatolia, devastating cities and disrupting old connections. After his death, the state he created quickly fell apart. It is on these ruins that new players emerge. In eastern Anatolia and the South Caucasus, Turkmen military alliances begin to dominate, primarily the Karakoyunlu and later the Akkoyunlu. Unlike the Ilkhans, these were not imperial administrators, but mobile alliances of military nobility who lived by raiding. For Samtskhe, this meant a fundamentally new threat. The Turkmen detachments acted quickly, did not recognize old agreements, and were not interested in preserving the local elite. Their targets were fortresses, livestock, the population, and control over routes. The Atabegs of Samtskhe found themselves in a difficult situation. On one hand, the Principality was still taking shape and was formally connected to the Georgian crown, but the center was too weak to provide real assistance. And on the other hand, Samtskhe no longer had an external protector who could restrain the pressure from the south. Under these circumstances, the defense of the region fell entirely on the shoulders of the Jaqeli and their troops. In the second half of the 15th century, the attacks became regular. The fortresses of Samtskhe held out, but the cost of defense kept rising. The lands were devastated, trade declined, and part of the population either left or was taken captive. The Atabegs were forced to maneuver. Sometimes they acknowledged the supremacy of one alliance, then sought support from another, trying not to let any of them gain a firm foothold in the region. By the end of the 15th century, Samtskhe found itself squeezed between two powers, each of which claimed control over the Caucasus. From the west, the Ottoman Empire was advancing. From the east, Safavid Iran. Both powers were on the rise, both expanding at the expense of border territories. And both saw Samtskhe not as an independent player, but as a convenient passage and a future foothold. The Atabegs were forced to act preemptively, offering loyalty even before an invasion. A characteristic example of this era is Manukar II. The beginning of his reign coincided with the start of the new Ottoman-Safavid War in 1578. The region became the arena for a clash of three powers: the Ottoman Empire, Safavid Iran, and the fragmented Georgian kingdoms. In 1578, after the Battle of Childir, the Ottomans defeated the Safavids and consolidated their success in the South Caucasus. Manuchar is summoned to Istanbul, where he is converted to Islam, given the name Mustafa, and appointed as the Pasha of the newly created Childir Pashalik. This was a deliberate political move to preserve power in exchange for recognizing Ottoman suzerainty. But the Islamization affected only the elite, while the Christian population of Samtskhe continued to live according to their old traditions. However, this arrangement turned out to be unstable. Manuchar begins to look for alternative support and establishes contact with Simon the Feas, the king of Kartli, one of the eastern Georgian states, who was also under constant Ottoman pressure. Manuchar informs Simon about the Ottoman command's plans, thereby depriving them of the advantage of surprise. As a result, the Kartli troops defeat the Ottomans on the Mukhrani plain. In 1581, Manuchar renounces his previous faith, returns to Christianity, marries the daughter of Simon I, and once again assumes the title of Atabeg of Samtskhe. This becomes the last attempt to restore the former status of the Principality. The Ottomans responded quickly and harshly. Manuchar's return to Christianity and his alliance with Kartli were regarded in Istanbul as a violation of his oath and an outright rebellion. The Sultan strips Manuka of his Pasha status and appoints Yusuf Pasha as the new governor of the Chaldir province with a specific task: to restore direct Ottoman rule in Samtskhe and eliminate the Atabeg autonomy. Yusuf Pasha, relying on garrisons and the support of part of the local Muslim nobility, invades the region. However, the campaign is difficult. Samtskhe proves to be hard to govern, the fortresses resist, the population does not accept the new administration, and Manuchar continues to maintain influence among the local elite. The attempt to quickly turn the principality into an ordinary province fails. In 1583, the Ottomans temporarily changed their tactics. Yusuf Pasha is recalled and Manuchar is reinstated as the ruler of Samtskhe, but now within the Ottoman system and under strict control. However, the compromise did not last long. The Ottoman administration consistently limited Manuchar's power, strengthened the garrisons, and prepared for the final subjugation of the region. Realizing that there was no room left to maneuver, Manuchar made his final choice. He turned towards Safavid and left Samtskhe. After Manuchar II's departure, the process could no longer be stopped. In the 17th century, the integration of Samtskhe into the Ottoman system became irreversible. His son, Manuchar III Jaqeli, still tries to preserve the Christian faith and the remnants of autonomy, but the Ottoman authorities no longer needed intermediaries, since they needed governable provinces. The decisive year is 1625. A relative of Manuchar, Beka Jaqeli, in order to gain power, converts to Islam under the name Safar Pasha, eliminates a rival from his own family, and receives the Sultan's approval as a Pasha. The former domain of the Atabeg of Samtskhe is reorganized into the Akaltsike Pashalik. The title of Atabeg disappears from political practice and remains only in Georgian historical memory. Subsequent members of the family rule as Ottoman administrators. Their residence becomes the fortified stronghold of Akaltsike. And the policy is aimed at the Islamization of the region and the suppression of centers of Christian resistance. In the 18th century, the Akaltsike Pashalik was repeatedly caught up in Russo-Turkish wars. The region loses stability, the population decreases, and the power of the Pasha increasingly depends on military force. The end of this story comes after the Russo-Turkish War of 1828-1829, when, under the terms of the Treaty of Adrianople, the territory of the Pashalik becomes part of the Russian Empire. Well, that's all from me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.